So picture this. It's 1997, and this journalist claims he's found a hidden, like, mathematical code inside the book of Genesis.
Right, and not just any code, but one that perfectly predicted the assassination of an Israeli prime minister.
Exactly. And he sells millions of books. Like, it's a massive global phenomenon. But then the scientific community steps in and basically publicly calls him a total fraud.
Which he was, at least in how he applied the data. But the wild thing that almost no one realizes is that the underlying math he based his entire crazy theory on, it actually worked.
Yeah, which just blows my mind. So welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at a truly fascinating stack of sources. It's this incredibly in-depth analytical transcript that examines the whole infamous Bible codes controversy.
It's such a great topic.
It really is. And our mission for you today is to basically deconstruct these codes. We are not looking at them as mystical prophecies. We're looking at them as this thrilling case study in cryptography, human cognition, and historical steganography.
Right, because we are going to discover how loud public sensationalism accidentally destroyed a completely legitimate, incredibly sophisticated field of academic study.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to understand where this whole ghost story came from, we have to go back to the spark that started the fire, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it really is a perfect storm of human psychology and, well, just statistical misunderstanding.
Right.
Because human brains are just hardwired for pattern recognition. I mean, we excel at finding patterns to survive, but our fatal cognitive flaw is that we often find these highly structured, meaningful patterns where absolutely none exist.
Like seeing faces in the clouds.
Exactly. Pareidolia. That is the foundational tension of our entire source text today. Are we looking at a genuine engineered signal, or are we just staring at the static on an old television screen and, convincing ourselves we see a ghost?
Right, so let's look at the spark.
Hmm.
It started in a surprisingly dry, rigorous academic place.
Mm.
The year is 1994.
Oh, yeah, the WRR paper.
Yes. A peer-reviewed paper gets published in the highly respected journal Statistical Science. It was by three mathematicians, Doron Fitztum, Eliyahu Rips, and Yoav Rosenberg.
And they use this technique called ELS, that stands for equidistant letter sequences.
So how does ELS actually work for someone who isn't a mathematician?
So to visualize ELS, you have to imagine stripping a text of all its formatting. You take the entire book of Genesis, you remove all the spaces, all the punctuation, all the paragraph breaks.
Just a massive block of text.
Right, just a continuous wall of letters.
Yeah.
Then you start skipping. You pick a starting letter, and you skip every n number of letters.
Like skipping every 4 letters or something.
Exactly, or every 50 letters, or every 200 letters. You do that to see if a new word is spelled out. It's a foundational concept in skip codes.
Okay, that makes sense.
And what Witztum, Rips, and Rosenberg did was apply this algorithmic skipping to the Hebrew text of Genesis. And they claimed to find the encoded names of famous historical rabbis positioned mathematically close to the dates of their birth or death.
Which is wild, because this wasn't published in some fringe self-printed newsletter, right? This was statistical science.
Yeah, it was highly credible.
The editor even published a note alongside the paper calling it challenging, basically admitting that they couldn't find a flaw in the math, so they were publishing it to see if the wider scientific community could find one.
But that modest academic spark was just completely overshadowed by the explosion that happened 3 years later.
1997. Michael Drosnin.
Right. Drosnin publishes his book, The Bible Code, and Drosnin took this concept and essentially threw the scientific method into an incinerator.
He really did. I mean,
Right.
he claimed the Bible was predicting the modern future. Assassinations, global wars, the moon landing.
All of it.
He famously claimed he found the word assassin intersecting with Yitzhak Rabin, predicting the prime minister's assassination, and even claimed he found references to the 9/11 attacks. And of course, the book sold millions.
What's fascinating here is the immediate and brutal scientific rejection of Drosnin's claims.
Oh, they tore him apart.
Universally. The academic and statistical communities looked at his methodology and proved the flaw in his work by demonstrating something called the Texas sharpshooter fallacy.
I love this concept.
It's so important. The fundamental problem with Drosnin's method is that he was using a massive data set. The entire Hebrew Bible contains hundreds of thousands of letters.
Right.
If you have a data set that large and you have literally millions of possible search parameters because you can skip forward, backward, diagonally, and at any interval from 2 to 10,000.
You are mathematically guaranteed to eventually find any word you're looking for.
Yeah.
Reading through our sources, the analogy that immediately came to my mind was this. Imagine a guy who walks up to the broadside of a barn with a shotgun.
Oh, the sharpshooter.
Yeah, he closes his eyes, spins around, and just unloads the entire weapon into the wood. Boom, boom, boom.
Just random scatter.
Right. Then he walks up to the barn with a bucket of red paint, finds the thickest, tightest cluster of bullet holes, and meticulously paints a bullseye right around them.
And claims he's a genius.
Exactly. He turns to you and says, "Look what an amazing shot I am. I hit the bullseye dead center." That's exactly what post-hoc data mining is. He didn't predict the target. He drew the target after he fired the gun and saw where the data landed.
That structural emergence from random noise is exactly what critics proved. They ran Drosnin's exact same ELS computer programs on secular books.
Wait, like normal novels?
Yeah. They fed Moby Dick into the software. They fed War and Peace into it. They even used U.S. Supreme Court opinions.
Oh, wow.
And using Drosnin's exact methodology, they found hidden codes predicting the assassinations of Abraham Lincoln and Indira Gandhi inside Moby Dick.
Inside a book about a whale.
Right, because if you search flexibly enough with enough parameters, random noise will always eventually mimic structure. Drosnin's book was just an absolute disaster for the public understanding of statistics.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look back at the original mathematician, Eliyahu Rips, because Rips was a legitimate, highly respected guy.
Yes, very respected.
When the Drosnin fiasco blew up, Rips publicly distanced himself. All right. He explicitly stated that without predicting an event before it happens, the codes prove absolutely nothing about prophecy.
Which is the correct scientific stance.
But he didn't retract the math itself, which feels like a massive contradiction at first glance.
Yeah.
If the method is flawed enough to find prophecies in Moby Dick, how can the original math still be sound?
Well, the reason his math worked and the reason the critics were so quick to dismiss it entirely is based on a massive category error.
A category error.
Yeah. The critics were judging the ELS patterns as cryptography when they should have been judging them as steganography.
Okay, we definitely need to draw a hard line between those two concepts for the listener, because they sound like interchangeable spy terms. But our sources highlight that the mechanical difference between them changes this entire debate.
It really does. So cryptography scrambles a message to make it completely unreadable without a decryption key.
Like the Enigma machine in World War II.
Exactly. It is meant to be painfully obvious that a secret exists. The enemy can see the intercepted message. It just looks like total gibberish.
Right.
Steganography, on the other hand, hides the existence of the message entirely. In a steganographic system, the sender and the receiver share what's called a cover text.
So it looks normal.
Precisely. It's an overt, perfectly normal-looking message. They also share an extraction algorithm. The goal of steganography is covert communication that just looks like normal background noise to anyone else.
Okay, so if I want to send you a secret meeting location, and I send you a letter that just looks like a completely normal, boring grocery list, like eggs, milk, bread, apples.
Right.
But we've pre-agreed that you only read the first letter of every third item on the list.
Yes.
That's steganography.
Yes. The person intercepting it doesn't even know there's a secret to look for.
So how does that apply to the Bible and Moby Dick?
Well, that pre-agreed rule is what the critics entirely missed when they pointed out all the random, meaningless false positives in the Bible and Moby Dick. In legitimate steganography, false positives are actually a feature, not a bug.
Wait, having wrong answers is a feature.
Yeah, they provide necessary cover traffic. Think about the mechanics of hiding a message.
Yeah.
If Genesis had 300,000 letters, and there's only one single decodable skip code pattern in the entire book.
It would be super obvious.
Exactly. It would stick out like a sore thumb to any statistical analysis. The fact that the text is rich enough to produce random noise, thousands of meaningless accidental ELS paths, is exactly what allows the real intended payload to hide in plain sight.
Oh, I see. The noise is the hiding place.
Right.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Rip's original 1994 study was methodologically sound steganography because he fixed his payload before he ever looked at the text.
He did the opposite of the sharpshooter.
Yeah, exactly. He took a pre-existing published encyclopedia of 32 historical rabbis and their dates and said, let's see if this specific data set is encoded.
He grew the bullseye first and then checked to see if the text hit it.
Right. Now, Rips eventually realized his metric was still vulnerable to subtle selection effects regarding how names were spelled, and he did retract the claim that it was divine encoding.
But the underlying statistical clustering he found was real. It was a genuine artifact of textual structure, not a miracle.
But, I mean, If it is legitimate steganography, that implies a staggering reality. You don't get a grocery list with a perfectly spaced secret message by accident. Are sources actually saying the original authors were secretly encoding things into the Hebrew Bible?
This raises an important question, and the answer is yes.
Wow.
Someone did intentionally encode highly structured data into the text. But it wasn't divine prophecy about 20th century political events. It was human scribes performing highly technical, incredibly tedious practical work. And this is exactly the history that the 1997 sensationalist Fiasco completely tragically buried.
We are talking about the medieval Masoretic scribes, right?
Yes.
These are the scholars whose entire life's work, their entire existence, was meticulously copying the Hebrew Bible by hand, generation after generation. And they used ELS patterns intentionally as checksums.
And a checksum is a foundational technical tool used in modern computing for error detection.
Like when you download an update.
Exactly. When you download a large file or update your phone's operating system, the server sends a tiny piece of data, a checksum, along with it. Your device calculates the data it received and compares it to that checksum to verify that the file wasn't corrupted or intercepted during the transfer.
That makes sense.
Ancient and medieval scribes had to solve the exact same logistical problem. How do we ensure this massive, incredibly important text is transmitted across centuries, copied by hand, without a single letter being accidentally added or dropped?
So these scribes were basically ancient IT workers.
That is an incredibly accurate analogy.
They were manually adding hash codes to physical parchment files so the next copyist 100 years later could verify the data wasn't corrupted.
Yeah, they developed brilliant verification techniques. For example, they used a system called Ketivkir.
How did that work?
Sometimes they knew a specific word had been traditionally spelled wrong in an older manuscript, but their rules strictly forbade them from altering the sacred text.
Oh, so they couldn't just erase it?
Right, so they would write the traditional spelling in the main body, the ketiv, which means what is written, and put the corrected spelling in the margin for kir, what is read.
That's so clever.
They also developed the Mazora Parva. These weren't mystical secrets. They were literal marginal notes tracking exact letter counts. A scribe would write down that the middle letter of the entire book of Genesis is a specific character in a specific word.
And then the next guy has to check it.
Exactly. When the next scribe finished copying, they would manually count the letters. If the middle letter didn't match the night perfectly, they knew they had dropped or added a character, and they would literally bury the defective scroll.
Just buried in the ground. The mechanical dedication that requires is staggering. But the example in the text that shows how they used ELS to do this is the menorah pattern. Let's walk through the mechanics of this because it absolutely blew my mind.
It's beautiful.
So the Hebrew word for Torah is spelled with 4 letters, Tav, Vav, Resh, Hey. If you go to the very beginning of the book of Genesis, find the first Tav, and skip exactly 49 letters at a time.
Which is 7 times 7, a highly structured symbolic number.
Right. It spells Torah forwards.
And it does the exact same thing in the second book, Exodus. You skip 49 letters, it spells Torah forwards.
Then it skips the third book entirely. You go to the fourth book, Numbers, and if 49 letters skips, it spells Torah backwards.
Right.
It does the exact same thing in the fifth book, Deuteronomy. So you have Genesis and Exodus pointing inward. You have Numbers and Deuteronomy pointing inward. The text is literally acting as a directional sign pointing at the center book, Leviticus.
Which is the book that contains the name of God.
Yes.
It forms a bilateral symmetry across hundreds of thousands of letters, a textual menorah. That is not a statistical artifact. That is not a random shotgun blast on a barn door. That is deliberate, functional, textual architecture engineered by human beings. It served as a mnemonic device and a massive integrity check.
Because if you mess up one letter.
Exactly. If a scribe accidentally dropped a single letter while copying the first chapter of Genesis, that 49-letter skip sequence instantly breaks. The checksum fails. The scribe knows the manuscript is corrupted without having to recount every single character.
It's brilliant. It's an ancient, functional technology hidden in plain sight. But our sources point out a massive tragedy here. They use this historical term, damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory.
It's really sad, honestly.
Because Michael Drosnin and the sensationalist ran around going on talk shows claiming these skip codes proved the Bible predicted modern events, the entire concept of studying ELS became a joke.
It became academically toxic. Researchers who just wanted to study these legitimate, historical, human-made scribal checksums suddenly found themselves facing career suicide.
You couldn't even touch the topic.
No! If you tried to get university funding to study Masoretic steganography, you were immediately lumped in with the Bible code crackpots. You were accused of peddling numerology and pseudoscience.
Which is so unfair.
Legitimate statistical curiosity and historical textual forensics were weaponized by journalists looking for a bestseller. And as a result, an entire field of historical cryptology was essentially stillborn. We stopped studying the genius of these scribes because we were too embarrassed by the sensationalists.
We lost access to understanding how ancient humans protected their most sacred data, all because someone wanted to sell books about Nostradamus-style predictions.
Pretty much.
But this brings up a huge dilemma. If you're listening to this and thinking, okay, if both the sensationalist crackpots and the historical scribes are looking at the exact same text, and they are both using ELS skipping, and they are both finding patterns.
Yeah, I tell the difference.
Yeah. How on earth do we separate brilliant ancient IT work from total internet nonsense?
That is the million-dollar question for any modern consumer of information. And fortunately, the fields of cryptography and steganography have already solved it. To distinguish signal from noise, you need an analytical tool that is epistemologically neutral.
Meaning it doesn't care what the claim is.
Exactly. It shouldn't care if the claim is natural, supernatural, and ancient or modern. It only cares about the rigorous methodology of the claim. That tool is called the Generalized Handshake Protocol.
The five-finger test. This is like the ultimate epistemological metal detector.
It really is. In cryptography, a handshake is a mandatory prior agreement between the sender and receiver. If I'm sending you a secret message, we have to shake hands beforehand to agree on the extraction algorithm.
Otherwise, it's just a guy with a shotgun.
Right. If there is no handshake, there is no message. You're just a decoder searching billions of combinations until you find something you want to see. The five-finger test generalizes this into 5 mandatory questions you must ask of any pattern claim to see if a handshake actually exists.
Okay, so if I'm trying to test a claim, the very first thing I need to ask is about its origin. Like, who actually set the rules for the search?
Exactly the right starting point. Were the parameters defined before you looked at the data? That indicates a potential signal. Or were they defined after you started searching, like Drosnin spinning around with a shotgun until he found something neat? Post hoc specification is an automatic failure. It's just noise.
Then you have to ask about transmission. If someone claims there's a secret key, how did they get it?
Right. If the pattern is legitimate, the extraction key has to be transmitted through an independent, verifiable channel. For the scribes, this was the public, verifiable Masoretic apprenticeship tradition.
They passed it down.
Yes. If the key is just, I wrote a proprietary computer program in my basement to find it today, that is an unverifiable transmission channel.
Which brings up the next hurdle. Function. What is the pattern actually trying to do?
Legitimate steganography serves a technical, practical function. A checksum that detects copying errors is highly plausible because we know the scribes needed that technology.
But if it's predicting the future.
Right. If the claimed function is semantic, like, it exists to tell us the name of a 20th century assassin that is highly suspect, why would ancient scribes embed that, and how does that practical function help the text survive the Middle Ages? It doesn't.
Then we get to falsification, which is the absolute bedrock of the scientific method. What would prove this claim wrong?
A legitimate claim must make specific negative predictions. If the 49-letter skip sequence breaks in Genesis, the text is demonstrably corrupt. That is a falsifiable claim.
So pseudoscience.
Pseudoscience is unfalsifiable. If you run a search for a prophecy and you can't find it, the sensationalist just moves the goalposts. They say, oh, you didn't search hard enough, or you're using the wrong skip distance.
Right. And finally, reproducibility. Can someone else independently verify it?
If independent agents can take the pre-specified parameters and get the exact same result without tweaking the data, that's credible. If it requires special access, hidden algorithms, or a subjective leap of faith, it's not a handshake, it's an illusion.
So what does this all mean? Let's actually put this metal detector to use with a really popular example from our sources. I'm sure a lot of people have heard this one floating around the internet.
Oh, the pi example.
Yes. The claim that the mathematical constant pi 3.14 is perfectly encoded in the Bible, because if you look at every chapter 3, verse 14, across different books, they all supposedly have some mystical connection to circles or geometry.
It sounds profound until you test it.
Exactly. Let's run it through the test. Origin. Who specified 3.14?
We did. Modern humans who use a base 10 decimal system and know that pi is roughly 3.14, it's entirely post hoc.
But the real fatal blow is the transmission of the handshake itself, the chapter and verse numbering.
This is where the claim completely collapses under historical scrutiny. Chapter and verse divisions are not original to the Hebrew text.
They weren't there at the beginning.
Not at all. The chapter system everyone uses today was imposed by a Christian archbishop named Stephen Langton in the year 1227.
Wow.
And the verse divisions were formalized by a French printer named Robert Estienne in 1551.
You're looking for an ancient divine secret using a medieval filing system.
It fails the transmission test instantly. The native Hebrew text uses entirely different division systems called Siderim and Parashot, which were based on ancient synagogue reading schedules, not numerical chapters.
Right.
Searching for 3.14 is a Christian editorial convention imposed centuries after the text was written. Now, our sources do point out that there is a potentially legitimate structural encoding of pi in the text, specifically in 1 Kings 7.23.
Oh, that's the one that describes the Molten Sea Temple Basin.
Exactly. But that encoding uses native Hebrew structural principles, relying on the Kadav-Kira spelling variations we discussed earlier to generate a mathematical ratio. It doesn't rely on arbitrary, historically anachronistic chapter numbers.
Okay, so the Molten Sea example warrants legitimate investigation because it passes the first few fingers of the handshake protocol. But the 3.14 claim is just noise.
Complete noise.
And that brings us to why all of this matters for you. The real value of this deep dive isn't just about debunking a best-selling book from the 1990s. It's about arming you with immunity to post-hoc pattern imposition.
It's a survival skill for the internet age.
Truly. Whether you're looking at claims of ancient prophecies or someone pitching you a bulletproof financial stock-picking algorithm or the latest internet conspiracy theory, you now have the generalized handshake protocol. You can demand the handshake.
Demand the evidence.
Right. It's about respecting the source material, whether that material is an ancient manuscript or a modern data set, and demanding rigorous evidence before you let your brain's natural pattern-matching software run away with you.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, I think the most lingering realization from all this material is just how easily loud sensationalism can completely erase quiet, brilliant human history.
Yeah.
The Masoretic scribes were mathematical architects. They built a magnificent, invisible scaffolding to protect their sacred texts over generations, and we almost lost that knowledge entirely because it was drowned out by people wanting to see the future in a cheap parlor trick.
It's a real shame.
It makes you wonder, what other ingenious historical human technologies or practices are currently buried under modern conspiracy theories, just waiting for the right handshake to be rediscovered?
It really does. Because at the end of the day, when you look up at that cloud in the sky, the face you think you see isn't really there. But the incredibly complex, beautiful atmospheric science that built the cloud, that's real. You just have to know how to look for it.
Thanks for diving deep with us today.